Effective participation in international meetings, a professional development webinar on cross-cultural communication. Dr. Sofia Chen, an expert in international business communication, is presenting on effective participation in international meetings. Participants include professionals from various countries.
Welcome everyone to today's session on effective participation in international meetings. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we have participants joining from over 15 countries, which perfectly illustrates the topic we're discussing today.
International meetings present unique challenges and opportunities. When participants come from different cultural backgrounds, communication styles, and language proficiencies, the dynamics become more complex. Yet, these diverse perspectives also create potential for richer discussions and more innovative solutions, if we navigate the differences effectively. Let's start by addressing one of the most fundamental challenges: language differences. Even when English is the common business language, proficiency levels vary widely. This creates an uneven playing field that skilled participants learn to navigate thoughtfully.
That's definitely a challenge in my experience. As a non-native English speaker, I sometimes struggle to express complex ideas quickly, especially in fast-paced discussions.
That's a common experience. For native English speakers, the key is being aware of this dynamic and adjusting your participation accordingly. Speak clearly at a moderate pace, avoid idioms or colloquialisms, and be patient when others are formulating their thoughts. For non-native speakers, several strategies can enhance your effectiveness. First, preparation becomes even more important. Thinking through key points in advance, and perhaps even preparing specific phrases or technical terminology, can significantly improve your confidence and clarity. Second, don't hesitate to ask for clarification when needed. If you're unsure about something, others probably are too. You might say, "Could you please explain what you mean by that term?" Or, "I want to make sure I understand correctly." Are you suggesting that? Third, focus on the clarity of your main points rather than perfect grammar or pronunciation. In international business, being understood is what matters most.
I find that sometimes my international colleagues are reluctant to speak up in meetings, even when I know they have valuable expertise. How can I encourage more balanced participation?
That's an excellent question that relates to our second major challenge: different cultural norms around meeting participation. In some cultures, speaking up in meetings, especially to disagree with others or offer unsolicited opinions, may be considered inappropriate or disrespectful. In others, active verbal participation is expected and valued. As a participant, you can help create space for diverse contributions. Use supportive invitations like, "Hiroshi, I know you have experience with this kind of implementation. What insights can you share from your perspective?" This direct but respectful invitation often makes it easier for those from more hierarchical or group-oriented cultures to contribute. Another effective technique is to use structured participation methods. For example, going around the group to hear each person's perspective creates a more comfortable opportunity for everyone to speak without having to jump in to a fast-moving discussion.
What about when there are misunderstandings due to cultural differences? I've experienced situations where I thought we had reached agreement, only to discover later that people had very different interpretations of what was decided.
That highlights our third major challenge: different communication styles and decision-making expectations. Some cultures communicate very directly and explicitly, while others rely more on context, implication, and nonverbal cues. For example, in many Asian cultures, saying, "This might be difficult," could actually mean, "This is not possible." But the direct refusal is avoided to preserve harmony. Similarly, what sounds like agreement, "Yes, we'll consider that," might actually be acknowledgement of hearing the point rather than commitment to the suggestion. To navigate these differences, Practice active listening and confirmation. Restate what you've understood and check for agreement. So, my understanding is that we'll implement this change by next month. Is that your understanding as well? Dai anbang. Be attentive to nonverbal cues and hesitation that might signal unstated concerns. You might say, I noticed some hesitation. Are there concerns about this approach that we should discuss?
This is helpful. Are there specific techniques for making sure my points are understood clearly when I'm participating in international meetings?
Dr. Chen.
Absolutely. Clarity becomes even more critical in international contexts. I recommend what I call the 3S approach: simple, structured, summarized. First, use simple language. Choose straightforward vocabulary and clear sentence structures. Avoid idioms, cultural references, or complex constructions that might be difficult for non-native speakers. Second, structure your contributions with explicit signposting. For example, I'd like to make 3 points about this proposal. First, second, third ... This structure helps others follow your thinking, especially when processing a non-native language. Third, summarize your key message at the end. This reinforcement ensures your main point isn't lost, even if some details weren't fully understood. So in summary, I'm suggesting we postpone the launch until we've completed additional testing.
What about virtual international meetings? Those seem to have additional challenges.
Virtual international meetings definitely add another layer of complexity. Technology issues, time zone differences, and reduced nonverbal cues all affect participation dynamics. In virtual settings, be even more deliberate about your participation. Use the chat function to add key points or questions if you're having trouble breaking into the verbal discussion. If you're leading a topic, consider preparing visual support that can be shared on screen to reinforce your key points. Be mindful of time zone burdens. If some participants are joining at uncomfortable hours, acknowledge their flexibility and perhaps be more concise in your contributions out of respect for their situation. Also, remember that video quality and internet connectivity vary globally. What seems like disengagement might actually be technology limitations. Give people the benefit of the doubt when interpreting participation levels.
I've noticed that the concept of time and punctuality varies. Across cultures. How should we handle these differences in international meetings?
That's an important observation. Time orientation does indeed vary significantly across cultures. Some cultures have a very monochromatic approach to time, linear, scheduled, and punctual. Others have a more polychromic orientation, flexible, relationship-focused, with less emphasis on strict scheduling. These differences can create tension in international meetings. Someone from Germany or Switzerland might consider starting 5 minutes late as disrespectful, while someone from certain Latin American or Middle Eastern cultures might see the relationship-building conversation at the beginning of a meeting as more important than starting exactly on time. As a participant, the best approach is to adapt to the dominant cultural norm of the organization while maintaining awareness of these differences. In most international business contexts, punctuality is expected, so err on the side of being on time. However, also be flexible and patient if meetings don't always run according to strict schedules. More importantly, be aware of how these different time orientations affect participation styles. Those from monochromatic cultures might focus on efficiency, staying on agenda, and concluding within the scheduled time. Those from more polychromic cultures might prioritize full exploration of ideas and relationship aspects, even if it means extending beyond the scheduled time.
What about building on others' ideas in international contexts? I've found this challenging when working across cultures.
Building on others' contributions is indeed one of the most valuable participation skills. but it requires careful adaptation in international contexts. The key is to explicitly connect your contribution to what came before, while being mindful of cultural differences in how disagreement and elaboration are expressed. In some cultures, directly contradicting another participant might be seen as appropriate and even expected for rigorous discussion. In others, it could be perceived as disrespectful or causing loss of face. A technique I recommend is what I call connect and extend. First, explicitly acknowledge the previous contribution. Juan's point about customer requirements is important. Then add your perspective as an extension rather than a contradiction, even if you're essentially disagreeing. Building on that, we might also consider how these requirements vary across different market segments. This approach works across most cultures because it shows respect for others' contributions while still allowing you to introduce different perspectives.
I sometimes struggle with knowing when and how much to contribute in international meetings. Any guidance on finding the right balance?
Finding the right participation balance is challenging in any meeting, but cultural differences add another dimension. Some cultures value concise, infrequent contributions focused on essential points. Others expect more verbal participation and elaboration as a sign of engagement and interest. My recommendation is to observe the participation patterns in each specific group and adapt accordingly, while still remaining authentic to your professional style. Pay attention to how frequently different participants speak, how long typical contributions last, how directly people express disagreement, how much personal or contextual information is included, then adjust your own participation to align better with these norms. If you're from a culture that values extensive verbal participation, but working in a group that prefers concise, infrequent contributions, you might need to be more selective about when you speak. Conversely, if you're from a culture where speaking only when you have something essential to add is valued, but working in a context where regular verbal engagement is expected, you might need to increase your participation frequency. The goal isn't to completely change your style, but to adapt it enough to be effective in that specific context while remaining authentic.
What about follow-up after international meetings? I've noticed different expectations about what happens after decisions are made.
That's an excellent point that often gets overlooked. Cultures vary significantly in how they view decisions and follow-up actions from meetings. In some cultures, particularly many Western contexts, decisions made in meetings are considered firm commitments that should be implemented as specified. In others, meeting decisions might be viewed more as directional agreements that will be refined during implementation or could change based on evolving circumstances. Similarly, cultures differ in expectations about documentation and confirmation. Some expect detailed minutes and explicit action items. Others rely more on shared understanding and relationship-based commitments. As a participant in international meetings, several practices can help navigate these differences. First, seek explicit clarity on decisions and next steps before the meeting ends. You might ask, could we summarize the key decisions we've made and specific actions we've agreed to? Second, follow up with written confirmation of your understanding, especially for items you're responsible for. Following our discussion yesterday, I'll be proceeding with X and will have results by next Friday. Please let me know if this doesn't align with your understanding. Third, be more explicit about progress and challenges than you might be in a monocultural context. I've completed the first phase of the analysis we discussed and am on track to finish by our agreed deadline. This explicit communication reduces the risk of misalignment due to different cultural assumptions about how decisions translate into actions.
Are there any universal principles that work across all cultural contexts in international meetings?
While cultural adaptation is important, there are indeed some approaches that work well across most contexts. I call these cultural bridges, practices that transcend specific cultural norms while still respecting differences. First, demonstrating respect is universally valued, though how respect is shown varies, Taking time to learn about others' cultural backgrounds, using appropriate forms of address, and showing genuine interest in different perspectives all signal respect across cultures. Second, preparation is universally appreciated. Coming to meetings having reviewed materials, researched relevant information, and thought through your contributions enhances your effectiveness regardless of cultural context. Third, active listening transcends cultural boundaries, showing that you're fully engaged with others' contributions through appropriate nonverbal cues, thoughtful questions, and accurate summarizing builds trust and rapport in any culture. Fourth, reliability and follow-through is universally valued. When you do what you say you'll do, consistently and thoroughly, you build credibility that enhances your influence across cultural contexts. Finally, a learning orientation serves you well everywhere. Approaching cultural differences with curiosity rather than judgment, seeking to understand rather than evaluate, and being willing to adapt your approach all enhance your effectiveness in international settings. To summarize our discussion today, effective participation in international meetings requires awareness of cultural differences in communication styles, language considerations, participation norms, and decision processes. By adapting your approach while maintaining authenticity, you can contribute more effectively and help create more productive international collaborations. The investment in developing these cross-cultural participation skills yields significant returns, not just in more effective meetings, but in stronger international relationships and better business outcomes. As our world becomes increasingly interconnected, these skills will only grow more valuable. Are there any final questions before we conclude?